In this video, we're going to talk about our first concept for how to keep readers reading, and that is how to get your readers to care. So we're going to go over the one key element, the one concrete thing that you can do on the page to ensure that your readers connect with your protagonist and care what happens to them. Now, we talked in the last video about how this is a green thing. This has to do with concrete, on-the-page word choice and the patterns of words that we use. And this is happening at the line-by-line level. We're not talking about these big patterns in your story. Instead, we're talking about what happens word by word, line by line on the page. So, to understand what's happening here, we need to go down to the very bottom of story. And that means taking a look at beats. Now, beats are the smallest unit of story. They are just one interaction, one energetic exchange. And that's what we're going to be looking at today to look at how to get your readers to care about your protagonist. So let's take a look at the structure of a beat. As I said, a beat is an energetic exchange, and that means that there's an input and an output. Now, when I say energetic exchange, all that means is that something is happening in the world of your story. It could be coming from one of your avatars. Again, that's the StoryGrid word for characters. It could be coming from one of the people in the setting. It could be coming from the setting itself. Something is happening in the arena of your story that is influencing the lives of the people within it. It could be coming from an object. It could be coming from something else, emotions rising unbidden, these kinds of things. But whatever is happening, it is knocking the lives of the people within the context out of balance. And so those things that happen act as input. It's energy. That energy is coming into the lives of the people within your story and causing an imbalance. And then they need to decide what they're going to do to correct that imbalance. So the people who respond to the inputs create outputs. And that's the second half of the beat. So you have the input and the output. Now, the input, as I said, has to knock someone's life out of balance, and it also has to create the need. So the audience recognizes the need for an output. And that means creating some sort of responsibility to output in one or more of the people within the setting. So that is, in short, what a beat is. So we use these colors to represent what's going on in the beat. We have our green input and our red output, and we'll talk about those little blue squares a little bit later. But this is, at its heart, what a beat is. Now, if we think about what we've just talked about, we can see that this relates directly to the 5 commandments. So let's take a look at that mapping. When we say that an input is something that comes into the lives of the people in the setting, knocks their lives out of balance, and requires them to try and set that right, that sounds an awful lot like an inciting incident. And it is. At the very smallest level, a beat is a unit of story, and that means that it has all of the foundational components that exist in a unit of story. And the inciting incident is just the input of the beat. So then, because this is a very small unit of story, we might have the turning point progressive complication on the page if we see them processing what's going on. We might have the crisis if they're not sure what to do. But often those can be implied because it's so small of a unit of story. And then the output, this is what they decide to do as a result of it. That's the climax. And that's the answer to the inciting incident posed by the input. So you have the input, you have the output, and then the resolution, which is the response to whatever happened in that climax, the response to the output, is the new input. So in that way, we can see that the beats chain together. So instead of discrete chunks of the 5 commandments that follow one after another at the beat level, they are chained together so that it keeps your reader propelled from one input-output pair to the next, because the input of the next one functions as the resolution of the beat that they just read. So we have the 5 commandments, we have how they map onto our input and output structure, and then what we need to know is, okay, well, how does that get the reader to care about my protagonist? Well, when we think about the protagonist, we have a very technical definition for that at StoryGrid, and it's whoever owns the climax of the unit of story. So here, what we can see is that the protagonist must be the outputter. And if you think about the experience of the reader or your own experience in dealing with the world, you can start to see why that has to be. So we live our lives and things are coming at us from the world all of the time. And as things come at us, we have to decide how we're going to respond to them. So in trying to think about their own situation, your audience is going to really connect to protagonists who have to work out things that are coming at them. This also goes back to what we talked about in the first video, which is why we tell stories. So we're telling stories because our audience needs to be empowered to solve the problems in their lives. We want to share messages with them. And this message isn't that, spontaneously you should do this thing. Instead, it's when this happens to you, this is how you can respond in the most effective way possible. We're exploring fundamental human problems. We're exploring the things that all of us have to encounter as we try to survive and thrive and derive meaning from this world. And when we think about those kind of problems, what we find is that we need to show our audience how they can react to the world or respond to the world in which they find themselves. And that means that they're not just spontaneously making decisions, but instead they're responding to the inputs that they see coming at them. Because we never change of our own accord. We change because things inspire us to change or force us to change. And so those changes have to be in reaction to something that is happening outside of ourselves. And that's why it's so critical that your protagonist be your outputter. So input comes into the protagonist, output goes out from the protagonist. And this is the critical thing that you can do to make your readers care about your story. It's just to put that protagonist in the outputter role. And it sounds so simple, but it's really profound because your reader is going to connect with your protagonist as they try to figure out the world. They're trying to figure out your story world too. And so they'll find themselves empathizing with your protagonist as they do the same thing, as they try to work out how to interact with this world that they find themselves a part of. And that's the role of the protagonist, is the outputter. Now, as we get further into study of beats, things like that, we find that it's not 100% of the time that the global story protagonist is the beat outputter, but overwhelmingly, your protagonist should be the outputter in your beats. So if you're starting out writing a story, a great rule is just make your protagonist your outputter 100% of the time. And then only if you really, really need to change it. But your default should be that your protagonist is going to be your outputter, and that's going to help your reader connect to them, help them care what happens to that protagonist as they build empathy for them and as they live in parallel with them in that world of your story.